Let's talk.
Giles Trow.
Failed justice. The Craig and Bentley case revisited. On the 2nd of November 1952, two teenagers, Derek Bentley and Christopher Craig, tried to break into a warehouse in Croydon. What happened next has become the stuff of infamy, miscarriages of justice, and just when you thought you kind of knew everything you could possibly know about the case, there's a new incisive tome come out talking about it. It's by MJ Trow, and I'm delighted to say that he joins me live on the line now. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
Good to have you with us. Whereabouts are you this morning, by the way?
I'm in the Isle of Wight, the not sunny Isle of Wight.
Well, it's good. It's good you're sort of hanging on. So, for those who might think, oh well, we've been through all this with Bentley and let him have it and all that. So, just give us a little bit of background for where your point of view comes on this, where this book comes from.
Okay, well. Some years ago, my wife went on an intensive driving course. We didn't use the word crash course, but you know what I mean. And she came back within an hour of having started. I thought, oh, God, she's planning the car. But no, nothing like that. Her instructor was the son of one of the policemen involved in the Craig and Bentley case. And they'd been talking about me as a crime writer. I'd written a couple of novels by then. And the instructor said, yeah, my dad was there on the rooftop in Croydon in 1952, but he was never called to court, and his evidence doesn't square with the official version. Do you want to know more? Well, of course I did. So that's where the whole thing started. I just took it from there, or at least I tried to. And the result was my book, Let Him Have It, which was published in 1990. Since then, we've moved on, and you'll see how in a minute.
So Let Him Have It is obviously the words that Craig says to Bentley, and for those who aren't familiar, or maybe for listeners who are listening from somewhere else in the world, just give us a very quick version, because obviously it's well known in the UK as a case.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Well, these two lads, Christopher Craig, 16, Derek Bentley, 19, went out to commit a burglary in Croydon. They came across this warehouse belonging to Messrs. Barlow and Parker. They climbed up onto the roof, shinning up drain pipes to get there, and they were seen by a local who called the police. Police turned up, police climbed up on top of the roof as well, and a shootout took place because Christopher Craig was armed. He was carrying a .445 Ely pistol. The police, of course, in those days, in the early 1950s, were unarmed. All they carried were truncheons. They had no firearms at all. Christopher Craig shot and wounded one of the policemen, Detective Fairfax, but Fairfax still had the strength and the guts to go after them again. He grabbed one of the two boys, happened to be Bentley, pinned him down, took him behind this roof shelter, frisked him, realized he wasn't carrying a gun, but Craig carried on shooting. More and more policemen turned up, and the upshot was that eventually Fairfax got hold of a gun. He fired back at Craig, missed, and Craig voluntarily jumped off the roof, almost certainly attempting to commit suicide. Both boys were taken into custody, and the law of the land then, which horrendously is still the law of the land now, is that if you take part in what's known as a joint felonious enterprise, i.e. burglary, and somebody is killed as a result, then everybody concerned is equally guilty. So even those Christopher Craig, who fired the fatal shot, he killed the policeman Sidney Miles during this shootout. Bentley was unarmed. Bentley was under arrest at the time, but under the law of joint enterprise, he was guilty. And, of course, at 16, Christopher Craig was too young to hang. Derek Bentley at 19 was old enough. And so hang he did at Wandsworth Prison 3 months later.
And of course, the thing is that obviously this is sort of tabloid heaven, isn't it? There's a huge outcry. Where is our youth going? These are the post-war years, and people are very worried about what's going to be happening to young people. And of course, the unfortunate Bentley is, he these days obviously he wouldn't hang, but he was. Well, the parts of the time he was slow. He wasn't, he had a very low IQ, didn't he? Of course.
He had a very low IQ, estimated to be 66. The average is 100. So Bentley all his life had struggled. He couldn't articulate. If you read the trial transcript, it looks as if he's holding up very well. His answers make perfect sense. In fact, that's not true. Those who were there in the court, the journalists and family members of the public, all said that he didn't really know what day it was. He didn't understand the questions. He was constantly asking for the counsel to repeat themselves, to explain what they meant. None of that is recorded in the official version at all. But what he was adamant about was that at no time did he say those magic words, "Let him have it, Chris," which the police said he did. And that phrase meant shoot him, kill him. Bentley didn't say those words, but it was those words that got him hanged.
I mean, the other thing, wasn't it? They were saying, let him have it. Even though he didn't say it, they said, oh, well, it could have been, let him have the gun. But, justice was seen to be done, as it were. And then, obviously, this campaign, against, to discover the truth goes on. And obviously, your book is published, back in the day now, which is called Let Him Have It. And people obviously now think this is one of the worst miscarriages of justice that there's been in the UK. So, revisiting this case, why did you want to go back and to what you called failed justice?
Okay, I was basically lied to in 1989-90 when I wrote my book. Having met the driving instructor's father, Claude Payne, who was a constable in Z Division Metropolitan Police in Croydon, Payne told me that he was on the roof. He got hold of an old ladder. There was a local resident who lent him this ladder. Claude Payne climbed up the ladder onto the roof. He saw the shootout. At no point did he hear anybody say, let him have it, Chris. But he wasn't called to the Old Bailey, to the trial. And so his evidence was completely buried. That was the information I had at the time. I then tried to confirm that in a variety of ways. I contacted Scotland Yard. I contacted the local division, Z Division. I contacted the Home Office. I contacted the archive unit, the National Archive as it's called today, and nobody could give me any information at all. Sorry, that's classified. It'll be years before anybody can see that. You can't get hold of it. So I had no other information at all. At Scotland Yard, I spoke to the curator of the Black Museum, which is a fascinating place to go. I actually handled the knuckle duster that Christopher Craig had made and which he'd put into Derek Bentley's pocket that night. I wasn't allowed to handle the gun, but it was there in front of me. But the curator was very dismissive. He said, and I'm sorry about the phrase, audience, but he said, a lot of shit has come our way on this case, and he refused, basically, to give me any more information. Then it transpired, months later, after my book had come out, that Claude Payne had been lying. Claude Payne was certainly there that night, but he wasn't on the roof. There was no ladder. He did not climb up. He did not see any of the action at all. So it isn't surprising that he didn't hear Let Him Have It, Chris. He didn't hear anything other than the shots that were being fired. He was on the ground the whole time, along with several other policemen. So I then had to go back to scratch, basically, and start again. And it didn't help, of course, that the ground had actually been knocked completely from under my feet. The guy I had trusted, the guy I thought was telling the truth, was not. And that left us floundering.
Is that sort of, why do you think he did it? Just to sort of, he wanted to big up his role? Is it sort of, I don't know, I was there and I want some recognition? It's a very strange one, isn't it?
I think you're absolutely right there. Yeah. It's the kind of story you tell your kids, isn't it? You know, you go home that night or probably the next morning when he saw his kids and he said, "You'll never guess what, kids, that there's been a shooting in Croydon. I was there. I was on the rooftop. There were bullets flying around in all directions. I was lucky to come back alive." And the kids believed it. So the driving instructor, who was one of Claude Payne's two sons, believed every word of it. Why wouldn't he? And that was lodged then in the public mind, if you like. And it simply wasn't true.
It's a bit like, isn't it, the final concert of the Beatles where there's like 8,000 people on the roof at Apple. You know, I was there. Yes, indeed. No problem at all.
Yeah, I think, absolutely. You're right. Yes.
Presumably, but this is obviously, you know, it's a while back now. Presumably, papers that were classified, you can now get your hands on through the archives. I mean, is that because I mean, a lot of people have thrown their hands up in the air and said, right, I'm never touching that one again. I was, you know, sold an absolute kipper by this gentleman.
There's been this brilliant thing called the Freedom of Information Act since I wrote Let Him Have It. It came out in 2005 in this country, though the Americans had one many years before that. And it meant that we now have access to all kinds of papers that were denied to us, to members of the public previously. Now, there's a bone of contention about all this because there is still an awful lot that remains classified. Some years ago, I wrote a book on Rudolf Hess, the Nazi who flew over to Scotland during the Second World War. His files are still classified because they are in the Swiss archive. Now, don't ask me why documents relating to a German flying to Scotland should end up in the Swiss archive, but there you go. So all kinds of doors are closed, all kinds of silences prevail. The public does not have the right to know. Government departments decide, and that is where we are, completely in the dark. And I am one of many historians and writers generally who constantly complain about this. Be honest. If you're going to open up your archives, really open them up. Don't play games. Don't pretend. Do it so we can see everything. I noticed that Donald Trump has just released archives on the famous JFK killing. Remains to be seen what they reveal, but at least he's doing the right thing.
I mean, but you see, the thing is, you know, as a historian and as a writer, when you say release the archives, I think people will probably think, oh, so it's all there, you know, beautifully catalogued. You just go, okay, it's A to Z, as it were, and there you go. Presumably, you're laughing, so obviously not. Presumably, they just go, there you go, you know, happy days, you know, the light box is over there. I'll see you in 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, if only it was that simple. Archives, in my experience, are very, very difficult to find your way around. Obviously, if you're talking about really historical stuff, you've got language problems, much of it's written in Latin, blah, blah, blah. Modern stuff, like Craig and Bentley, is perfectly out there, it's perfectly clear, it's typewritten rather than handwritten. But how much of it is actually still there? How much of it hasn't been weeded out already? I've written several books on Jack the Ripper, and I know for a fact that there's vast amount of Ripper-related material that has gone walkies over the years. For example, there were over 2,000 letters and postcards written by the public, either to the police or to the media, relating to the case at the time. There are less than 200 of them now. Where have they gone? Who knows?
Yeah,
but gone they have.
I mean, the thing is, isn't it? Of course, the thing is, during those times when it wasn't so much, it was a little bit looser, shall we say, with libraries. So one could walk in and stroll out. I mean, isn't it? You know, the SOE or the SIS or whatever the sequence, they lose an awful lot of their stuff in a convenient fire just after the war.
Yeah, absolutely. That is very true. That happens all the time. But it has tightened up. I mean, I can remember when I was a student. at London University, walking into what was then the Public Record Office. I simply had to sign a form to say who I was, and I was allowed to wander around the corridors. There was no check, there was no security, there was certainly no CCTV. I could have helped myself to anything I liked. You can't do that now, thank God, but you could back in the day.
So what archive are we talking about? Is this the National Archive in Kew, British Library, or is there an actual police archive that I don't know about and I should know about and you're about to tell me?
I expect there is a police archive you don't know about. Yes, neither do I. No, I'm talking about Kew here, and the staff at Kew couldn't be more helpful. They're really marvellous, and they made everything that they have available to me. Unfortunately, as I say, the archive is only as good as the people who put it together originally, minus the other stuff that may have gone missing. So what you find in archives is 6 or 7 copies of the same statement or the same letter. Totally unhelpful. You might as well throw the rest away as long as you keep one. I was going to say it's all online now. It's all on USB, but it isn't. It's still on bits of paper. As a dinosaur, technologically, I'm happy with the bits of paper rather than the USB. But you can certainly store a lot less if they're still in cardboard boxes than doing it the more modern way.
So when it comes to revisiting this, do you have to, if you like, wipe the memory stick clean? Because obviously you spent an awful lot of time with the first book, and you don't just dash one of these things off of a lunchtime, and you get emotionally involved with it, and you think that you are, shining a light on a great miscarriage of justice, which you are, but you've been given faulty information. So when it comes that you get more information, you revisit it. How difficult is it for you to not get the niggle, as it were, about what previously happened?
Very difficult. I was annoyed. I am annoyed that this misinformation is out there. It doesn't do the cause of justice any good at all. It certainly does no good for Derek Bentley, who was hanged, after all, for a crime he didn't commit. The Bentley family, his parents spent the rest of their lives. His sister Iris spent the rest of her life fighting for justice. And ironically, Iris, who I met several times, died before Derek Bentley got his pardon. In fact, it was a pardon first of all, and then the case was overturned. But it was overturned because of the appalling bias of the trial judge, Chief Justice Goddard. It was not overturned because of what I take to be the fabrication of police evidence. In other words, justice has been served, but for the wrong reason. The other problem, of course, is that as time goes by, witnesses die. People I spoke to in 1990 are dead now, and I have no way of verifying what they told me either. You just have to believe that some people are telling the truth, unless you can find evidence to the contrary.
Yes, I suppose the main thing as well is you need primary evidence, you need primary reports, that are taking place at that time, because it's very easy, sort of 30 years on or 40 years, to sort of colour your recollections a bit, because you kind of know what happened. And so therefore, if you've got a primary source, a report at that day, somebody's diary note or a letter, that is worth its weight in gold.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I've now seen all the police testimony at the time, the reports of every single individual from Z Division who was there that night, which I was not allowed to see back in 1990. So it does clarify the situation. You are aware of what's going on, and that obviously has to be helpful. The other issue is the media. No offense, of course. But
no, I've had worse insults thrown on me. Trust me on this one, MJ. Don't worry about that.
There is the classic case of the Daily Mail coverage at the time. The day after the shooting, the A headline said, gun battle in Croydon, machine guns were used, a Sten gun was located at the site, there was a running battle with the police. None of that is true. The only guns that were used were two pistols, one fired by Craig, one fired by Constable Fairfax, and that was it. No other guns were used at all. But if you read the Mail the day after it happened, you would think that Chicago had come to Croydon. Totally untrue.
But the thing is, of course, we're talking about the post-war years. People have access to weaponry. People know how to use weaponry. It's a time of austerity. But also, as I said before, nothing exists in a vacuum. The authorities are thinking something must be done about these young tearaways. And unfortunately, this is what happens with Bentley.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They were called Kosh boys in those days, and Christopher Craig was a classic example. He was 5'3". He dressed and sounded like Jimmy Cagney or Humphrey Bogart, the Hollywood stars of their day, who were always thugs and villains on the big screen. He didn't fool anybody, but he liked to think he was a hard man, and he carried a gun. He had over 40 firearms in his possession. His father collected guns, and so in the Craig household, that was fine. An awful lot of men came back from the war with firearms that ended up in their houses. My dad was one of them. My dad was in North Africa. He came back with a German flare pistol, which all my life was in our house. Now, you say, well, flare pistol is harmless. No, a flare pistol can kill somebody. It has happened. Luckily, ours wasn't used in a crime, but it could have been. The idea of firearms in the streets was absolutely alien in 1952. Sadly, of course, it's all too common today.
Yeah, but at the same time, we talk about the Kosh boys and Cagney and the whole thing about, oh my goodness, these American gangsters. I mean, now it looks quite quaint, isn't it? But at the time, it was shocking. But today we have the horrendous situation of knife crime in the UK and people emulating guys that they see in video, allegedly in video games or in certain video clips. So things have changed, but in the other way, they haven't, have they?
No, that's exactly right. I think you're right about the whole video games thing. I think an awful lot of young people can't tell them from reality. They have no idea what the impact of a bullet really is. They just see a fake, artificial, fabricated figure fall over, a big explosion, boom, terribly exciting. And of course, it isn't really like that. It is horrendous.
Now, people may say, well, why is he going back to this case? But you said something at the beginning of the interview, which not a lot of people will know this. I'm familiar with this particular loophole in the law, which is that if you are with a group of people and something happens and somebody says, I'm going to knock your block off, and thus it comes to pass that person's block is indeed knocked out and he falls and he hits his head and he dies, you are as guilty as the man who threw the punch.
That's exactly right. It was the law in 1952. It is still the law today. I'm not sure if it operates in the States. It certainly used to, but I don't know at the moment. You can see why that law was brought in, because if you've got 10 lads, shall we say, they're all involved in trying to break into somewhere, and somebody is shot, all they have to do is to pass the buck. Well, I didn't do it, he did it, no, he did it, no, he did it. And in the end, of course, nobody is taking responsibility, so the fear is that they'll all walk. One of them is guilty of murder, but nobody will be punished because they're passing the buck. That's why the law was brought in, but it went too far, I think, in the other direction, so that all those 10 would be equally guilty of murder, even though 9 of them are actually telling the truth by saying, well, he did it. That isn't considered to be good enough, which is why Derek Bentley was in law as guilty as Christopher Craig. And I think that's wrong. And I'm astonished that the law hasn't been amended by now. They've had plenty of time to do it.
Do you still, when you write this, because we know what happens we know the ending, what happens to Bentley and Craig, but especially Bentley. It must be heart-wrenching even when you get back to it, because we know the effect it has. He doesn't really know what's going on. His family for the rest of their lives try and clear his name. I mean, it's such a bitter and sad tale.
It's terribly sad, and I notice in the press at the moment there are demands again to bring back the death penalty, especially for terrorism, especially for situations where children are killed, which has happened recently. And I can understand that anger, and I can understand that hopeless sense of tragedy, but I don't think, vis-a-vis the Craig and Bentley case, that hanging is the right solution.
What are you hoping then that people will take from failed justice?
I'm hoping they will look critically at the legal system, because I think it's the legal system that is at fault. Frank Castles was one of the defense counsel. His job was to try and get Derek Bentley off. John Paris was defending Christopher Craig. Now, I won't swear online, but Frank Castle said when he met John Paris, his colleague, he said, well, personally, I think both the little
So-and-so's, yes,
ought to swing. Now, I'm sorry, but this is the defense counsel, and he thinks that his client ought to be hanged. So how hard did he try, huh? For Frank Castles and too many men like him, it was just a job. He was paid a disgusting amount of money, by the way, no matter what the verdict. Frank Castles went on to become, surprise, surprise, a High Court judge. And the system stinks. Then we had a system whereby Lord Goddard, the Lord Chief Justice, the highest law in the land, wanted to bring back not only hanging, but to bring back use of the birch as well, to beat criminals. He thought that was the right thing to do. He was a dinosaur. He was out of touch with his time, but he was the Lord Chief Justice, the highest in the land. Now we seem to have swung in the other direction. Now judges, a little bit soft, a little bit namby-pamby, a little bit, human rights, blah, blah, blah. I don't know how you win on that one, but surely there has to be some kind of happy medium, some halfway house.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is not as easy in black and white as doing that, or doing the old sort of emperor at the Colosseum, because life isn't like that. And it might be very easy to say to people, yes, especially after what we saw last week with the judgment on the Stockport case, he should hang or whatever. But unfortunately, life isn't like that. It's much more complex. And things like the Bentley trial prove that innocent men and women, let us not forget, have suffered miscarriages of justice.
Absolutely, yeah, you're exactly right. It is complicated. That the whole thing is. Dare I say it, 50 shades of grey rather than black and white, and it always will be. We are going to have these arguments forever, I feel sure.
Well, listen, I'm very glad you had the time to speak to me today, and going back and revisiting the case. The book is called Failed Justice. You'll be able to order it via our own virtual bookstore. It's by M.J. Trow. Fascinating stuff. What are you working on next? Because you have done this sort of thing before.
Yeah, I'm sort of revisiting. I'm writing a series of 3 books on pathologists at the moment. The medicine behind crime solving. People like Bernard Spilsbury, people like Keith Simpson, going way back to the famous Chinese detective in the 13th century, who got it right, by the way, 700 years before we did in the West, about the way science solves crime. And I'm finding that absolutely fascinating.
Well, and indeed you will. Well, I look forward to speaking to you when that one is out. But this one is called Failed Justice, the Craig and Bentley case revisited. Oh, but by the way, where can people find you online? Sorry, MJ, I didn't actually mention when people can follow your adventures.
Sure. You can contact me via my publishers, Pen and Sword of Barnsley, or my email, thetrows@live.co.uk.
This book is
Okay.
Wonderful. The book is called Failed Justice. It's by M.G. Trow. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.